They always say the desert wind is just a nuisance. Hell, some folks even call it charming, as if it's some dusty, friendly ghost that only rattles your windows and makes your porch creak at night. Yeah, right? See, I spent a couple decades in the military learning the language of storms. And if there's one thing I know, it's this: nothing in this world is more patient or more merciless than the wind. That's why when HOA Karen bulldozed my windridge, without a permit, without so much as a knock, just so she could open up her $1,000,000 view, I tried to warn her. Showed her the models, the wind data, the weather maps that I trusted more than any damn forecast on TV. She just laughed, told me to lighten up. 3 days later, a sandstorm rolled in a mile wide and erased half her neighborhood. You think that's a coincidence? Try telling that to the desert. This place was never meant to be easy. Out here, the sun bakes your bones, and the wind'll sandblast the paint off your truck in an afternoon. Most folks come for the big sky and the promise of quiet, but I came looking for silence, the kind that settles into your chest after too many years of jet engines and mortar alerts, the kind you earn. 22 years in the Air Force, 12 of those scattered across dust-blown bases in the Middle East, listening for the whistle that means you've got 5 seconds to get underground. By the time I found the house on Mesa Hollow Drive, all I wanted was a patch of land that answered to no one but me. The house itself was nothing special, a squat adobe out past the boundary of Sunspire Estates. Not quite in, not quite out, and that suited me fine. But what really sold me was windridge. That's what the old-timers called it. The sandstone spine curling along the east edge, 40 feet high at the crest, red as dried blood and just as stubborn. No trees, no postcard sunsets, just weathered rock and a handful of barrel cactus clinging to the ridge like sentries. It broke the wind. Before windridge, storms would rip patio covers off, send them cartwheeling across the valley like playing cards. The ridge was the only thing that stood between us and the painted flats, splitting the worst of the freight train winds and bleeding off the rest. It had done its job for 1,000 years. So I moved in. Didn't bother with a fence. My surveyor double-checked the lines. Eastern slope, crest, the whole deal, legally mine. It felt right. Open, unbroken, the way land ought to be. Meanwhile, Sunspire Estates sat tucked downhill, HOA run, like a gated tan bowl where everything matched. Roofs, palm trees, mailboxes, even the shade of sand they used to paint the curbs. Rules on rules, from grass height to holiday lights, all enforced by the clipboard mafia. 2 weeks after I moved in, I met her. Karen Braithwaite, HOA president, pressed khaki, a smile that never touched her eyes, and a clipboard held like a shield. She barely introduced herself before she was hinting that my solar water heater was an eyesore and windridge was, in her words, blocking the community's southern views. I told her, calmly, that my land wasn't under Sunspire's jurisdiction. She blinked, recovered, then smiled, fake as spray on grass, and said, "We like to keep a cohesive aesthetic for the greater community. That's HOA speak for. You're not from around here, are you?" Then she dropped the real bomb. "We're considering grading down that ridge for air quality and landscaping harmony." I almost laughed. You can't grade what you don't own. She just nodded, as if she'd confirmed some suspicion. That was the first time I realized they didn't see windridge as geology. They saw it as an obstacle. Days later, the HOA Bulletin talked up a desert renewal project all about scenic overlooks and restoring natural sight lines. Translation, bulldozing my ridge. So I started documenting photos, drone footage, time-stamped GPS logs, the whole 9 yards. Got copies of every deed, every survey, every bit of legal armor. Even called an old Air Force buddy, Ray Torres, now retired BLM geologist. He nearly choked on his coffee when I told him the plan. "Clint, that ridge is the only thing saving Sunspire from getting its ass handed to it every spring. Take it down, you open a wind tunnel straight to their front doors." Soon as survey stakes showed up, orange flags hammered right into my land, some 20 feet past the boundary. I spent the evening yanking every last one, bundled them up, and laid them out in perfect parade order across Karen's porch. No note. She replied next morning, of course. A fancy piece of letterhead slipped through my mail slot, warning me that obstruction of community improvement efforts will be documented. I scanned it, added it to my growing binder, and went up the ridge to watch the sunset. Wind already picking up, that old familiar pressure in my skull. The next HOA meeting was outdoors, supposed to be all community unity. I wasn't invited, but Leonard, the art teacher from 2 streets over, handed me the agenda, told me, "They're voting on your ridge tonight." So I went. Stood at the back while Karen, blazer untouched by the dust, droned on about visual obstructions and aesthetic harmony. She called Windridge a wart on the face of our horizon. I raised my hand, introduced myself, and made it clear, that ridge has been your shield since before this place had a name. Remove it, and you'll be buying new roofs every year, if you can find anyone willing to insure you. Karen shot back with consultant reports and property values, but the crowd was listening now. I handed a fat folder to the board. Deeds, overlays, expert affidavits, all of it. "Touch this ridge," I said, "and you'll see court before you see a sunrise." That was the night the battle lines were drawn. Leonard found me on my porch afterward with 2 mugs of tea, told me, "Karen rewrites the rules until she wins." I just nodded. Let her try. But I started sleeping with one eye open. Installed trail cams and motion sensors. Sent copies of every document to my attorney and the county sheriff. Next morning, I found a note on my truck. "That ridge won't stand forever. Neither will you." No signature, but the perfume was pure Karen. Couple nights later, I caught 2 figures on the ridge, spray painting ugly across the sandstone in 6-foot red letters. By sunrise, the whole neighborhood had seen the photos. Karen organized a volunteer cleanup, and the word was gone by noon, but the message was clear. Soon after, Leonard showed up with cookies and a warning. Karen was petitioning to have the ridge condemned as a public hazard. She only needed 250 signatures and already had 190. That's when I started knocking on doors. Most folks shut me out, but some listened. A retired couple who poured iced tea while I showed them Ray's wind diagrams, a young dad who saw the gust vectors and went pale. By week's end, I had 43 signatures on my counterpetition. Karen stalled at 211. County inspectors came out, spent 3 hours with their clipboards, then told me, "Never seen a more bulletproof deed in 20 years. That night, the wind started to change, deeper, angrier. I stood on the crest, feeling the pressure drop, and knew something big was coming. I ran the models, old Air Force simulation suite, fed it every variable, then modeled what would happen if they cut the ridge by 12 feet, just like Karen's experts wanted. The screen filled with angry red arrows, a mile-wide corridor, gusts doubling, particulate loads off the charts. Sent it certified to every board member, city planner, county official. Next day, the HOA's lawyer sent me a threat: stop disseminating alarmist conjecture or face a defamation suit. I posted the raw data online, Reddit, Nextdoor, weather forums. Within hours, the story went viral. Meteorologists backed me up, my inbox flooded with support. Karen? She kept walking her Pomeranian, sunglasses on, ignoring me. When I confronted her with the expert reports, she just said, "You can't stop progress, Mr. Maddox." Some of us refuse to live in fear of a little wind. That's when I realized she'd never understand. Not until the wind came for her. And it did. 3 yellow bulldozers showed up at dawn. No permit, no county escort, just engines and arrogance cutting straight into my land. I ran out. No phone, just my veteran ID and the binder, planted myself in front of the blade called 911. Karen showed up in her pink windbreaker, ordered the operator to proceed. I stood my ground. The deputies arrived, shut everything down. Karen tried to talk her way out of it, but Deputy Herrera told her flat, "You're a homeowners association, not the Bureau of Land Management. You just ordered felony criminal damage on private property." The wound they carved was already bleeding sand by the time the sun went down. 3 days later, the wind hit, harder than anything I'd ever seen. A mile-wide sandstorm rolled through the breach, funneled by what used to be Windridge, turning Sunspire Estates into a sandblasted wasteland. HVACs clogged, pools filled with mud, emergency calls off the charts. County opened an environmental review, but paperwork moves slower than wind. Then came the real storm, a hubbub, the kind I'd only ever seen in Iraq. The sky turned bruised brown, then black. The wind roared for hours, tearing roofs, snapping power poles, turning the HOA's artificial lake into chocolate milk. When it was over, Sunspire Estates was gone, buried, erased, nothing but a sea of rippled sand and a half-buried sign. HOA blamed me. Karen went on TV, claimed I'd obstructed community improvements. But the drone footage didn't lie. Red arrows from my models matched the path of destruction. Lawsuits flew. Residents, city, even the state piled on. Karen vanished. House for sale, name scrubbed from the internet, but folks always find out the truth. Months later, as I planted seedlings on what was left of the ridge, Karen showed up. No clipboard, no armor, just a tired woman with a letter. She left on a rock, her confession. She wrote about losing her husband, about control, about thinking beauty was perfect lines and fences, not wind-carved rock and a man who stood his ground. I folded it into the binder with the rest. The ridge was gone, but in its place something better, the line the kids called it. Volunteers came, planted, rebuilt. Not the ridge, but the spirit of what it meant. Even the feds showed up, officially designated it a protected windbreak, retroactive to the day the first blade cut in. And for the first time since I moved here, the wind moved gentle, carrying seeds, not punishment. I stood on the new crest, watching the land heal, knowing peace doesn't come from silence, but from sovereignty, the right to say, this far, no further. I came here looking for quiet. What I found was a voice. Now, the land and I, we speak the same language. So let me ask you this, who was right in the end? The ones who demanded order, or the ones who listened to the land? Drop your story below, argue if you want, but don't ever think the desert owes you comfort. Out here, respect is the only law that matters. If you've got a story about fighting for your land, your peace, your little patch of sky, share it. Maybe someone's listening. Maybe this time, we all finally learn.